For these problems, we're going to find the difference of numbers. And a difference is just the answer to a subtraction problem. So let's do some examples where we have to find the difference. So in the same way that when we're finding sums, when we're finding differences, we need to make sure that we keep all of the places lined up correctly. On vertical problems, it's no big deal because usually they're lined up already. But on horizontal problems, you want to be really careful that you line them up correctly. And then you're going to start in the ones place and subtract, then the tens place, then the hundreds, then the thousands. So let's look at number 1. We check and see it's already lined up, and now we're going to start in the ones place and just do subtraction. 7 minus 3 is 4. Now we'll move to the tens place. 9 minus 4 is 5. Then we'll move to the hundreds place. 8 minus 2 is 6. And then in the thousands place, 4 minus 1 is 3. Okay, so this is the easiest type of finding answers to subtraction problems. There was no regrouping at all. But let's move into number 2, because number 2, you're going to have to do some regrouping. So it's already lined up, and we're going to start in the ones place. We have 4 minus 6. Some people are going to be tempted to write a 2. But you have to be careful because this problem is not 6 take away 4. It's 4 take away 6. And if you only have 4, you can't take away 6. So what we're going to do is have to regroup. We're going to borrow a 10 from next door and add it back. So what we're going to do is look in the tens place, and we're going to take one of those 10s. So now instead of having 5 10s, we're going to have 4 10s. But that 10 can't just disappear, so what we need to do is add it back in the ones place. So instead of having a 4, you now have a 4 plus the 10, which makes a 14. Okay, so when I'm doing subtraction problems, I always think about the word or acronym BASO. It stands for borrow, then add back, and then start over. If you do this, if you borrow, then add back, and then start over, you won't get confused in between steps. So on this one, we've borrowed from the tens, and we added it back to the ones, and now we're going to start all the way back over with the ones. So back in the ones place, now we can do 14 minus 6, which equals 8. Okay, and now we're going to move to the tens place, and we have 4 minus 8. Some people are going to be tempted to write a 4 here, but it's not 8 take away 4. It's 4 take away 8, and we don't have enough. So what we're going to need to do is borrow. So when we go to the hundreds place, we're going to take one of those hundreds. If you take one of those, they no longer have 6, but now it's 5. So we did the B part of BASO, we did the borrow, and now we're going to add it back right next door. So we're going to take 10 of those and give it into this place. So now we have 10 of the new ones plus 4 here. So instead of a 4, we're going to have 14. So that was the A, the add back. So we borrowed and we added back. Now we're going to start all the way over. So we've already done the ones, and now let's move to the tens. Now we have 14 minus 8, and 14 minus 8 is 6. Now we'll keep going. 5 minus 7. Okay, so we can't do it again, so we're going to have to do BASO again because you can't take 7 from 5. So we're going to start with borrow and add back. So we're going to go next door and borrow 1,000. If you borrow 1,000, it's like 10 $100 bills, and this is the hundreds place. 10 hundreds makes 1,000. So we're going to take 1,000, we're going to take 10 hundreds and move it into the hundreds place. We already had 5 there, so now we had 15. So we did the borrow and we did the add back, and now we're going to start over. Done, done, and now we're in the hundreds place. We have 15 minus 7, which equals 8. And now we have 8 minus 1 equals 7. So our answer is 7,868. So let's look at number 3. Number 3 goes a little bit even further with difficulty because now we have some zeros mixed in with the number. So it's the same thing where you line up the places and you start with the ones place and subtract on. Again, you can think of the acronym BASO. Borrow when you need to, but if you borrow, you must add back and then you must start over. So let's start in the ones place. We don't need to borrow, so we can just solve. Now we're going to move to the tens place. All right, so if you have 0, you can't take away 1, so you are going to need to regroup. You're going to need to borrow. But if you look next door, you can't borrow there either. So what we're going to have to do is make a double jump here. We're going to have to borrow 1,000. So if you borrow 1,000, you could borrow 10 hundreds because 10 hundreds makes 1,000. So if you take 10 hundreds, you would need to move them right next door to the hundreds spot. So instead of having 0, you now have 10 hundreds. So when you borrow, after that, you're going to add back, but you always have to add back right next door. You couldn't borrow from the thousands and take that 1,000 you borrowed and put it in the tens place or the ones place. You always need to add back right next door. So once you've borrowed and added back, then you start over. So we're done with the ones, now we move into the tens. It's really important that you start all the way back over just to keep all of your places organized and your regrouping done correctly. So in the tens place, we have 0 and we're trying to take away 1. We can't do that, but at least now we can borrow. We can go to the hundreds place and borrow one of those hundreds. We can add it back into the tens place because 10 $10 bills or 10 tens makes 100. So we can add that 10 back in the tens place, and we had 0 before, so now we have 10 more, so that becomes a 10. So we've borrowed and we've added back, and now we need to start over. The ones place is done, and now we're in the tens place. We have 10 minus 1, and that would equal 9. We don't need to borrow, so we can keep going. In the hundreds place, we have 9 minus 1 would equal 8. And in the thousands place, we have 7 minus 7, which equals 0. That looks sort of funny, and you wouldn't ever do that. So instead of doing that, you just rewrite the value as 890. This is one of the skills that people have a hard time with and can get really messed up in the borrowing and regrouping process of subtraction. If you remember BASO and you always borrow and then you add back and then you start over between every step, you'll have a much easier time. So let's look at what happens when you have a subtraction problem that is written horizontally. You will solve it exactly the same except for you must rewrite it vertically before you solve it. That way you can get the places lined up and make it much easier to solve. Don't try to solve it in your head or across paper this way. There's too much room for error if you do that. So you just take the number 7,246 and you're going to subtract 143, making sure that you keep your places lined up. 143. Once your places are all lined up in the right spot, you can just subtract as normal. Start in the ones place. 6 minus 3 is 3. 4 minus 4 is 0. 2 minus 1 is 1. And 7 minus 0 is 7. All right, you take some time and practice some of these. If you have trouble subtracting, especially when you have to regroup, you can revisit this and watch it again, or you can really just practice and practice a lot with your teacher or your mom and let them walk you through each step until you can do it really easily. All right, good luck.